My husband of 20 years told a judge I was just a hostess who deserved nothing from our restaurant, a business I had poured my soul into. He thought his dismissal had left me powerless and broken. So I didn't argue. I just made one simple request for the employee records, setting a legal trap he never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The words echoed in the sterile, beige-walled conference room, though they had been spoken hours earlier in a courtroom I wasn't even present for. My lawyer, a kind but pragmatic woman named Ms. Davies, repeated them with a carefully neutral tone, but I could see the pity in her eyes. He said, and this is a direct quote from his counsel's brief, that your contributions were ancillary and atmospheric. He claims your role as a hostess, while appreciated, was not integral to the financial success of Thorne's table, and therefore you are not entitled to a significant share of the asset. Just a hostess, I whispered, the phrase catching in my throat. It felt like a physical blow, a calculated strike designed to shatter the very foundation of my identity for the past 2 decades. My hands, resting on the polished mahogany table, trembled slightly. I curled them into fists, digging my nails into my palms to ground myself. I was Presley Hayes, 42 years old, and for the first time since I was a teenager, I felt utterly and completely erased. We were in the thick of what the legal world called divorce proceedings, a term so clinical and detached it failed to capture the raw, brutal reality of dismantling a life. Marcus Thorne, the man whose name was literally emblazoned in glowing neon above our restaurant's door, the man I had loved, supported, and built a world with, was systematically trying to write me out of our shared history. Thorne's table wasn't just a restaurant to me. It was the place I'd sketched on napkins in our tiny first apartment, the dream I'd championed when Marcus was just a line cook with ambition burning in his eyes. It was the floors I had chosen, the color palette I had agonized over, the staff I had personally hired and trained to be a family. It was the reason I had set aside my own promising career as a paralegal, trading legal briefs and discovery motions for seating charts and vendor negotiations. I had poured every ounce of my energy, my creativity, and my love into that establishment. I had been its heart, its soul, and its smiling face at the door every single night for 15 years. And now, according to the man I still, on some cellular level, considered my partner, all of that work amounted to nothing more than a walk-on role in the grand theater of his success. The humiliation was a thick, cloying thing, but underneath it, a different feeling began to smolder. It was cold, sharp, and intensely focused. A dormant part of me, the part that thrived on logic, evidence, and the precise, unyielding power of the law, was beginning to wake up. Ms. Davies was speaking again, suggesting countermeasures, talking about appraisals and forensic accountants to prove my financial entanglement. I listened, but my mind was already somewhere else. It was in the back office of the restaurant, late at night, long after the last customer had gone home. It was in the quiet, hushed complaints from the kitchen staff about their hours. It was in the worried whispers from the servers about their tip envelopes feeling light. Marcus saw me as Presley the hostess, a decorative, smiling figurehead. He had forgotten who I was before I met him. He had forgotten Presley Hayes, the top paralegal in her class, the one who lived for the fine print. I looked up, meeting my lawyer's sympathetic gaze. The tremor in my hands had stopped. "Forget the forensic accountants for a moment," I said, my voice steady and clear. "As part of discovery, I want to request something specific." Ms. Davies leaned forward, pen poised. "What is it?" "I want every employee record from the day Thorne's table opened its doors until today," I stated. "Payroll, time cards, tip-out logs, everything." She blinked, confused. "Presley, that could be seen as an overreach. His lawyer will argue it's a fishing expedition to harass him." "Let him argue," I replied, a sliver of ice in my tone. "Tell him I need it to substantiate my own work hours." It was a plausible lie, but it was a lie nonetheless. My work hours were not the prize I was after. The truth was far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more satisfying. In that cold, sterile conference room, I realized that Marcus hadn't just erased me, he had underestimated me. And his arrogance was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. The betrayal was worse than any financial loss could ever be, and its remedy would be a matter of public record. The phone call came 2 days later, just as I knew it would. I was sitting in the small apartment I'd rented, surrounded by boxes that held the fragments of my former life. The screen lit up with his name, Marcus. For a moment, my heart did a familiar, painful flip. I let it ring 3 times before answering, forcing my voice into a calm, almost detached tone. "Hello, Marcus." "Presley," he began, and I could hear the smug confidence oozing through the speaker. It was his magnanimous victor voice, the one he used when he thought he had already won. "I heard about your latest request. Employee records? Really? What are you trying to do? Bill me for every dinner service you ever worked." He chuckled, a dry, patronizing sound that grated on my nerves. "Listen, this is getting ridiculous. My lawyer says you're just flailing. I don't want to drag this out and make things ugly for you. It's not a good look." I remained silent, letting him fill the space. It was a tactic I had learned negotiating with difficult vendors, but it worked just as well on an arrogant ex-husband. "So here's what I'm going to do," he continued, his tone softening into a parody of generosity. "Out of respect for the years we had, I'm prepared to offer you a one-time payment. $50,000. Clean break. You sign the papers, and you can go start over, find a nice little job somewhere." $50,000. For 20 years of my life. For a restaurant that grossed millions a year. The insult was so profound, so utterly dismissive, that it didn't even sting. It clarified. It was like a splash of ice water, washing away any lingering sentimentality. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice impossibly serene. His confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. He had expected tears or yelling or desperate pleading. My calm was not part of his script. "It's a very generous offer, Presley. More than you'd get from a judge, believe me. They see what I see. I built this, and you were there." "I see," I said. "Thank you for the offer, Marcus. I'll have Ms. Davies review it." "There's nothing to review. It's a simple, generous gift." "Everything," I said, my voice hardening just enough to cut through his bluster, "must be reviewed. I'll be in touch." I ended the call before he could respond, my finger pressing the screen with surgical precision. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a silence filled with purpose, not despair. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the anonymous city street below. He had no idea what was coming. He was playing checkers, moving his pieces with loud, obvious clicks while I was setting up a chessboard he didn't even know existed. He believed his own narrative so completely, the narrative of the lone male genius, the brilliant artist whose success was his and his alone. He had surrounded himself with people who reflected that image back at him, and in doing so, he had forgotten the person who had stood beside him in the trenches, the one who knew every crack in the foundation, both literal and metaphorical. He had forgotten one crucial thing. He had forgotten who I was before I was his wife. That quiet, methodical paralegal was still in here, and she was about to start her work. Our story began, like many do, with a shared dream and not much else. I was a 22-year-old paralegal working for a high-powered corporate law firm. I was good at my job, meticulous, organized, and driven. I loved the puzzle of it, the way a case could be won or lost on a single, well-placed piece of evidence. Then I met Marcus Thorne. He was a sous chef with a fiery passion and a vision. He didn't just want to cook, he wanted to create an experience. He wooed me with that vision. He would talk for hours about Thorne's Table, a place that would feel like an extension of a welcoming home, where every detail, from the lighting to the texture of the menus, was perfect. I fell in love with the dream as much as I fell in love with him. When he found a rundown space he could afford, I was the one who spent weeks poring over zoning laws and permit applications. When the bank denied our first loan application, I was the one who restructured our business plan and financial projections, until they finally said yes. I quit my job. My bosses were shocked. "You're giving up a partnership track for this?" my supervising attorney asked, bewildered, but I believed in Marcus. I believed in us. I traded my sensible blouses and legal pads for jeans and a tool belt. I helped sand the floors, I chose the paint colors, I interviewed and hired every single member of our opening staff. And when we finally opened, I took my place at the front door. Not because it was an easy job, but because I knew the first impression. The welcome was the most critical part of the experience we were selling. I was the guardian of the dream. In the early years, we were a team. We celebrate successes and weathered failures side by side. But as Thorne's Table grew from a local favorite into a critically acclaimed culinary destination, something in Marcus shifted. The we slowly became I in interviews. He was the visionary chef. He would talk about my concept, my staff, my restaurant. My role, once acknowledged as a partnership, was softened in his retellings, becoming more of a supportive background function. The antagonist wasn't a new person in his life. It was the man he had become. This new Marcus was polished, charming to the media and high-paying guests, but behind the kitchen doors, he was a different person. He ruled by fear and ego. I saw it in the way he would belittle a young line cook for a minor mistake, or the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he spoke to the dishwashers. His relationship with the staff was purely transactional. They were cogs in his machine. I was the one who knew their families, who remembered their birthdays, who mediated their disputes. I was the glue. Gabriel, our head waiter, a dignified man in his late 50s with a quiet strength and an unshakable loyalty, had been with us since day one. He was the restaurant's institutional memory. He saw the change in Marcus more clearly than anyone. "The chef is stressed," Gabriel would say diplomatically after Marcus had thrown a tantrum over a misplaced fork, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He saw Marcus taking credit for dishes the sous chef developed. He saw him berating the hostesses I'd trained. And he heard, as I did, the growing chorus of complaints about payroll. "My overtime from last week seems to be missing," a server would mention quietly. "The tip out seems higher than usual," another would confide. When I brought these concerns to Marcus, he would wave them away with irritation. "It's restaurant math, Presley. It's complicated. Let me handle the business side," he'd say, a patronizing pat on my hand accompanying his dismissal. He had compartmentalized me. I was the people person, the soft touch at the door. I wasn't meant to understand the real business. His condescension was the slow-acting poison that eventually killed our marriage, long before the lawyers got involved. He had transformed from my partner into a polished, disingenuous tyrant, and his kingdom, built on our shared dream, had become a place of exploitation. He just didn't know that its first and most observant citizen was about to hold him accountable. The $50,000 offer was the catalyst. It wasn't an insult, it was a declaration of war. That evening, I didn't cry or rage. I went to the one box in my small apartment that wasn't filled with dishes or photo albums. It was a heavy, cardboard file box, sealed with packing tape. The label, written in my neat block lettering, read, "Law Passed Files." I slit the tape and opened the lid. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air, the scent of my former life. I pulled out textbooks on civil procedure and employment law. For the next several hours, I wasn't Presley the heartbroken wife or Presley the hostess. I was Presley Hayes, paralegal, and I was building a case. The anger that had been simmering inside me cooled and hardened into pure, crystalline focus. My path forward was no longer a vague hope for fairness. It was a precise, multi-step legal strategy. My first call the next morning was to Ms. Davies. "I'm rejecting Marcus's offer," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And I need you to trust me. The request for employee records is non-negotiable. File a motion to compel if they refuse. Cite potential financial mismanagement and the hiding of marital assets as the reason. Be aggressive." Ms. Davies was silent for a moment. "Presley, this is a very assertive move. Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. My next step was more delicate. It required leaving the safety of legal theory and stepping into the real world. I sent a simple text message to a private number. "Gabriel, it's Presley. I need to speak with you about something important and confidential. Can you meet me?" He replied almost instantly. "Of course, the cafe by the park, 1 hour." When I saw him, my heart ached. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. He greeted me with a warm but sad smile. "Presley, it's not the same without you at the door," he said quietly as we sat down with our coffees. "It's not the same anywhere, Gabriel," I admitted. I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm in a fight with Marcus. He's trying to say I did nothing for the restaurant, that I deserve nothing. Gabriel's eyes hardened. "That is a lie. This place would have crumbled in the first year without you." "Thank you," I said, the simple validation nearly bringing tears to my eyes. I pushed them back. "But this is bigger than just me. For years, I heard the whispers, unpaid overtime, skimmed tips. I brought it up to Marcus and he dismissed me. He dismissed all of you." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have officially requested every payroll record since opening day as part of the divorce. I'm going to get them, one way or another. And my guess is that those records will tell a very interesting story. A story of wage theft." Gabriel stared at me, his expression unreadable. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "What are you proposing, Presley?" This was it, the moment my trap would be set or would fail entirely. "I'm proposing justice. I'm a trained paralegal, Gabriel. I know how to build a case. If what I suspect is true, Marcus hasn't just been cheating me, he's been stealing from every single person on his payroll. I want to represent you, all of you, in a class action lawsuit against Marcus Thorne and Thorne's Table." He looked at me, truly seeing the woman he was talking to, perhaps for the first time. Not the chef's wife, not the friendly hostess, but a sharp, determined legal mind. "He does it every week," Gabriel said, his voice low and firm. "He has a line on the books for kitchen supply spoilage. It's a percentage he takes out of the tip pool before it's distributed. He calls it insurance against waste. It's a fiction. And over time, no one gets paid for the extra hour of breakdown and cleaning. Ever. He just adjusts the time cards." The confession hung in the air between us. It was everything I suspected and more. "Will they trust me?" I asked. "Will the staff stand together?" Gabriel looked out the cafe window, his gaze distant for a moment. Then he turned back to me, a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "They don't trust him," he said. "They respected you. Let me talk to them. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore, Presley. You're fighting for all of us." As I walked away from that cafe, the weight on my shoulders had shifted. It was no longer just the burden of my own grief and betrayal. It was the weight of a responsibility, a righteous cause. My investigation had officially begun, and I had just found my star witness. The next mediation session was held in a larger, more imposing conference room at the offices of Marcus's lawyers. The air was thick with tension. Marcus sat opposite me, flanked by 2 attorneys in crisp, dark suits. He looked impeccably groomed, radiating an aura of bored impatience, as if this whole affair were a trivial nuisance he was forced to endure. He refused to make eye contact with me, instead directing a smirk at his lead counsel, a man named Mr. Harrington. Ms. Davies began the proceedings with the usual pleasantries before getting straight to the point. "Regarding our outstanding discovery request," she said, her voice calm and professional, "we have yet to receive the employee and payroll records for Thorne's Table." Mr. Harrington sighed dramatically. "As we've stated, we find the request to be overly broad, burdensome, and frankly, irrelevant to the core issue of dividing marital assets. My client has already made a generous offer to Ms. Hayes to expedite this matter." Marcus nodded in agreement, a self-satisfied look on his face. He was enjoying this, the performance of power. "With all due respect," Ms. Davies countered, glancing at the notes I had prepared for her, "we believe the records are not only relevant but critical. My client has reason to believe there have been significant, ongoing financial discrepancies in the restaurant's payroll system. I watched Marcus's expression. The smirk faltered for just a second. Harrington scoffed. Financial discrepancies? What is that supposed to mean? Are you accusing my client of poor bookkeeping? This was my cue. I had instructed Ms. Davies that I would handle this part myself. I cleared my throat, and all eyes in the room turned to me. It means, I began, my voice steady and measured, that I believe marital assets are being deliberately hidden or diverted through fraudulent means, specifically through the systemic underpayment of employees. This constitutes a pattern of financial mismanagement that directly impacts the true valuation of the business. The silence in the room was absolute. I had taken a vague accusation and turned it into a specific, legally potent claim. Fraud, hiding assets, those were magic words in divorce court. Marcus's composure finally broke. He slammed his hand lightly on the table. This is insane. She's making things up because she's bitter. She was a hostess. What would she know about payroll or financial mismanagement? He spat the words out like they were poison. She's trying to slander my business and my reputation out of spite. His outburst was exactly what I had hoped for. His anger was a confession. An innocent man would be confused, perhaps even amused. A guilty man lashes out with poorly executed threats and blustering denials. Mr. Harrington tried to regain control, holding up a placating hand to his client. My client's frustration is understandable. These are baseless and defamatory allegations. Are they? I asked, my gaze locking onto Marcus's for the first time. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fury and something else. Fear. Then you should have no problem turning over the records to prove it. Unless, of course, there's something in them you don't want me, or a judge, to see. I had revealed just the tip of the iceberg, but it was enough. I had seen the flicker of panic in his eyes. I had turned his own lawyer against him, who was now looking at Marcus with a new, questioning intensity. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer the grieving wife asking for scraps. I was a calculated opponent who had just put him in check. He didn't know it yet, but the game was already lost. The first crack in the fortress of his ego had appeared, and I knew exactly where to apply pressure to make the whole thing crumble. The court granted our motion to compel. 2 weeks later, 23 bankers' boxes, filled with 15 years of restaurant records, were delivered to my small apartment. For Marcus, it was a nuisance. For me, it was a treasure chest. The scent of dust and old paper was invigorating. I set up a folding table, uncapped a red pen, and began the hunt. My paralegal training, dormant for so long, came roaring back to life. I worked with a methodical intensity, fueled by coffee and a burning sense of purpose. I cross-referenced time cards with payroll checks. I built spreadsheets. I highlighted, I calculated, I annotated. And the picture that emerged was more damning than even I had imagined. It was a symphony of theft, conducted with chilling consistency. Gabriel was right about the spoilage fee. A neat 3% skimmed from the credit card tips every single night. I found the unpaid overtime, hours shaved from time cards with a pen stroke. I found bussers who were paid a tipped wage but were forced to spend hours doing non-tipped work like polishing silver and cleaning bathrooms, a clear violation of labor law. The total, even in my preliminary calculations, was staggering. Meanwhile, Gabriel became my quiet general. He organized discreet meetings in coffee shops and back alleys. I would sit with shell-shocked servers and weary line cooks, showing them the numbers from their own pay stubs. I explained the law in simple terms. I wasn't asking them to join a crusade. I was showing them evidence of money that had been stolen directly from their families. One by one, they signed the representation agreement, designating me as their legal representative. The fear that had kept them silent for so long was replaced by a shared, quiet anger. They had a champion, someone who understood both their plight and the legal system they were up against. Marcus felt the tide turning. He must have. He grew desperate. He started holding staff meetings where he'd talk about loyalty and teamwork, his words ringing hollow. He tried to intimidate Gabriel, pulling him aside and warning him about spreading rumors. But the dam of silence had broken. The stakes escalated when Harrington, Marcus's lawyer, called Ms. Davies for an emergency meeting. They were rattled. We met in the same conference room as before, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, defensive posture. "My client has authorized me to increase his settlement offer," Harrington began, avoiding our eyes. "Substantially, $300,000. In exchange, you will cease this intrusive investigation into our client's business practices." I smiled faintly. It was a panic offer. Ms. Davies looked at me, and I gave a slight nod. She slid a single, thin folder across the table. "Before we discuss any offers," she said, "we'd like you to review this. We've prepared a preliminary findings report on a single employee as a sample." Harrington opened the folder. Inside was a 10-page document titled, "Payroll Analysis, Gabriel Martelli." It detailed, with irrefutable evidence from their own records, every single dollar that had been stolen from Gabriel over his 15 years of service. Unpaid overtime, illegal tip deductions, miscategorized labor. The final number at the bottom of the page was $87,452.18. And underneath it, a legal citation for treble damages, which would triple the amount owed as a penalty for willful violation. Harrington's face went pale. He looked from the document to Marcus, who suddenly looked small and cornered in his expensive suit. "This is one employee," I said softly, breaking the silence. "There are 46 others who have already signed on with me. We have a file like this for every single one of them. So, no, Mr. Harrington, we will not be accepting your client's offer. We will, however, be filing a class action lawsuit for wage theft, racketeering, and punitive damages. My contingency fee for that suit is 40%. I let the math hang in the air. 40% of a multi-million-dollar settlement. It would be far, far more than I would ever have received in a simple divorce. Marcus finally spoke, his voice a choked whisper. "You can't do this, Presley." "You taught me how to run a business, Marcus," I replied, my voice cold as steel. "You taught me that everything has a price. You put a price on my contribution to our life's work. You called me just a hostess. Well, this is my new price. This is what I'm worth." The spell was broken. The image of Marcus the genius, the titan of industry, shattered right there in that room. All that was left was a common thief, exposed by the very records he was too arrogant to believe anyone would ever understand. We arranged the final meeting not in a courtroom, but on neutral ground, a large, soulless conference room at a mediation firm. Marcus had requested it, clinging to the hope that this could all be settled behind closed doors, that his reputation could still be salvaged. He arrived with Harrington, looking tired and drawn, the impeccable charisma replaced by a brittle facade. He thought he was coming to negotiate the terms of his surrender in the divorce. He was wrong. When he walked in, he stopped dead in his tracks. The room was not empty, save for me and our lawyers. Sitting calmly at the far end of the long table were three figures: Gabriel, his back straight and his expression resolute; Maria, a single mother who worked as one of our most senior servers; and Carlos, a young, ambitious line cook who Marcus had once humiliated in front of the entire kitchen. They were the class representatives. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice thin. "This is a private marital negotiation." "Not anymore," I said, rising from my seat. "This is a legal conference. Please sit down." He hesitated, but Harrington, looking utterly defeated, gestured for him to take a seat. For the next hour, Marcus sat in stunned silence as I, with the calm authority of the paralegal I once was, walked him through the case against him. I didn't use emotional language. I didn't talk about betrayal or broken hearts. I presented facts. With my laptop connected to a large screen on the wall, I displayed spreadsheets, highlighted payroll documents, and sworn affidavits. I moved from employee to employee, from crime to crime. Exhibit A, the illegal spoilage fee. A 3% deduction from the tip pool, netting an average of $8,200 per month, for a total of approximately $1.47 million over 15 years. This money was transferred to a personal holding account, not reinvested in the business. I clicked to the next slide. Exhibit B, Systematic Time Card Alteration. We have documented 7,842 instances of unpaid overtime across 47 current and former employees. The total in unpaid wages, before penalties, is estimated at $631,000. I continued, my voice even and relentless. I detailed the illegal wage tiers, the forced, unpaid training shifts, the retaliation against an employee who had tried to file a complaint years ago. With each slide, another layer of Marcus's self-made myth was stripped away. He was no longer a visionary chef. He was the architect of a vast, criminal enterprise. When I was finished, a profound silence filled the room. Marcus stared at the screen, at the mountain of his own deceit, his face ashen. Then Gabriel spoke, his voice resonating with 15 years of quiet dignity. We weren't just your staff, Marcus. We were the family that Presley built. We worked hard for you. We were proud of Thorne's table. But you didn't see us. You just saw numbers on a spreadsheet that you could manipulate. You disrespected the woman who built this family, and you stole from us to fund your lifestyle. Maria spoke next, her voice trembling but strong. That money you took from my tips, that was my son's dental appointment. That was the school trip I couldn't afford to send him on. It wasn't just numbers to us. The final, triumphant moment came not from me, but from Ms. Davies. She stood and placed a thick, bound document on the table in front of Harrington. Here is your courtesy copy, she said. The class action lawsuit, Martelli et al. V. Thorne, was filed with the Superior Court 1 hour ago. A process server is waiting for your client outside this building. The sound Marcus made was something between a gasp and a sob. The public humiliation, the one thing he had fought so desperately to avoid, was now inevitable. It was over. He hadn't been defeated by a scorned wife. He had been dismantled by a team of undervalued people, led by the hostess he had long since written off. In his attempt to leave me with nothing, he had handed me the very weapon I needed to take everything that mattered to him. His money, his reputation, and the restaurant he had stolen from us all. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Marcus. The lawsuit was picked up by the local news, then by national food blogs. The story was irresistible, the celebrated genius chef exposed as a common thief by his ex-wife and his own loyal staff. The headline, "Just a Hostess Serves Up Justice," went viral. Thorne's table, once the pinnacle of fine dining, became a symbol of greed and exploitation. Reservations evaporated overnight. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, public ruin, and a staff united against him, Marcus had no choice but to capitulate completely. His lawyers advised him to settle everything as quickly and quietly as possible to avoid a drawn-out, career-ending trial and potential criminal charges. The resolution came in 2 parts. First, the divorce. I received a 50% share of all marital assets, including the now tarnished brand of Thorne's table. Second, the class action settlement. To pay the back wages, the triple damage penalties, and the legal fees, Marcus was forced to liquidate. He had to sell the restaurant, the building it was in, his luxury car, and his downtown condo. My 40% contingency fee from the massive settlement was, as I had calculated, a life-altering sum, far more than I would have ever seen from the divorce alone. But the true victory wasn't the number in my bank account. It was watching the faces of Gabriel, Maria, Carlos, and all the others when they received their settlement checks. It was seeing the relief, the vindication, the feeling of being seen and valued after years of being ignored. A few months after the dust settled, I hosted a dinner. Not in a fancy restaurant, but in the backyard of the modest but beautiful house I had bought with my share of the settlement. My guests were the former staff of Thorne's table. We grilled, we laughed, and we talked about the future. Gabriel, who had received the largest individual payout, raised a glass. "To Presley," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't just get us our money back, she gave us back our dignity. Everyone cheered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of profound peace. I had not only reclaimed my own history, but had also secured a measure of justice for the people who were the true heart of that restaurant. The next day, I had a meeting with a commercial real estate agent. Gabriel, Maria, and Carlos were with me. We were looking at a space, a closed-down diner with good bones and a lot of potential. I was using a portion of my money as the primary investment, setting up a new business where the employees would have a profit-sharing stake. It would be a true partnership. As we stood in the empty space, sketching ideas on a notepad, I felt a familiar spark. It was the thrill of building something new. But this time, it was different. This dream was not built on the ego of one man, but on the collective strength of a family. I had lost a husband and a restaurant, but I had found my purpose again. I wasn't just a hostess, and I wasn't just a paralegal. I was Presley Hayes, and I was just getting started.